everyone, and welcome to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about brand new Cherry Flavor, which is a new Netflix show. This is season 1, episode 1. In fact, it's a limited series, I believe, so it's just episode 1. And this came out today, and it is called I Exist, this first episode. So I will talk about it. I'll start spoiler free. I'll give you some thoughts and opinions, and then I'll maybe dive into the episode in a little bit more detail. But I was intrigued by the premise of this one, which is about a young filmmaker played by Rosa Salazar, who I recognized and think I know only from Alita Battle Angel. So you'll recognize her, but obviously she wasn't. You know, she was like partly CG in that movie because she was playing kind of the weird robot, but you know you can still sort of see it's her. And got some other names in here that I recognise from other shows. Deke from Agents of Shields in a role. He's not in a ton of this first episode, but he's there, and there's a few other faces as well. But she comes to Los Angeles, and she wants to turn her short film into a feature length. The basic premise is that she is wronged, and that there's going to be a supernatural form of revenge that is then sort of taken. Obviously, this first episode doesn't necessarily get into that too much. This first episode is largely about the initial wrong that she experiences, the wrongdoing, if you will. The other big thing, of course, is that it's set in the early 90s, so it's a period piece and wants to have kind of a vibe and kind of a feel to it. There's a lot of shots of LA at night from the hills with all the all the lights in the night time and that kind of like glitz and glamour star vibe of the city. There's a lot of that going on. That's your basic kind of setup for the show. As for what I thought of this first episode, I'm a little conflicted because I like the premise a fair bit. I think I like what it's going for in that I enjoy the idea of someone being passionate about film and then kind of almost becoming a movie character in themselves because they are wronged and then have to seek retribution for that. There is something to that. It's hard not to think, this wasn't a movie making thing specifically, but it's hard not to think of something like the Neon Demon. Obviously that was more to do with modeling, but similar kind of vibe. The idea of like coming to LA and being swallowed alive by the horrible institute that is the filmmaking and the showbiz world. So that stuff's kind of fun, and I think Rosa Salazar, who, I mean, it was hard to gauge how good she was in Alita Battle Angel. She seems pretty solid here. It's a very different role, of course. She's kind of more of the tortured artist who is chain smoking and is a bit more of a bad attitude, and but not an unlikable attitude though. She comes across fairly well early on in the episode. We meet one of her friends who lives in the city, who gives her a place to stay. He's got a girlfriend who clearly doesn't like that she's hanging around, and there's other characters introduced. The other big character in this episode, because I'd say there's two important characters this episode, really, and it's obviously her because she's the main character. Her character is Lisa Nova, and then there's the producer character Lou Burke, played by Eric Lange, who was in another Netflix limited series called Unbelievable. He is the producer who's seen her short film and wants to meet her and talk to her about the possibility of optioning it and maybe turning it into a feature-length film. He does that thing that characters in TV shows and movies do when they want them to appear really smart, is that they'll constantly cut off the character, our main character who's trying to explain things or answer a question that was already asked, and they'll be cut off halfway through the answer because he's decided that the answer is not that interesting, and he's going to like start talking about something that he will eventually sort of tie into what he means or why it's relevant to the conversation, or he'll drop like a bit of trivia about an animal somewhere in the world, and then he'll sort of turn it into how that's like being in LA in the movie business and so on and so on. So there's quite a bit of that coming from him. And I didn't really know much about the premise outside of the fact that she was going to want revenge. But I didn't know what the vengeance was going to be for. I didn't know what the act of malice or the act of whatever it was going to be was going to be. So For me, this first episode was largely waiting to see what that was going to turn into. Um, so yes, but back to sort of general thoughts. I think Rosa Salazar's pretty good. The cast in general are pretty solid, to be honest. I find it hard to kind of fault any of them. I think what was lacking for me in this is probably that it wasn't stylistic enough. It kind of felt like it had a little bit of style at the start when she's driving on her way to the city. There's kind of, there's music playing that's of the era. It comes up saying the early 90s and it's got a particular kind of font, and there's like a mysterious like biker who's kind of following her. You never see who the biker is. The helmet's always on, and she's making a phone call at the service station, and there's kind of a vibe. It's nighttime, and I'm not sure necessarily what I want it to be going for, but it was giving me like a sort of like a light version of Under the Skin, or a little bit of Neon Demon, like I said earlier. There's kind of these different things. The problem I had is that once I actually got to the city, and once she was actually having meetings with the producer, and then a lot of the episode was her with the producer in various stages of this like deal, and a couple of scenes with her friend, sort of building up the idea that she's going to try and get this movie made, is that the scenes started to feel a lot more normal. It felt like it was missing some music to make it feel a little bit dreamlike, or a little bit something. There was a feeling that I got particularly early on when she's had the first meeting with the producer, and he seems pretty gung-ho about going through with everything, to the point where even when she insists that she's going to be the director, like she's like, no, I'm only doing this if I can direct it, right? Which is very presumptuous as someone who has never actually made anything professionally and is coming to LA for the first time, but she's determined that she wants to direct her own thing. He hesitates when he hears this, but he says he's willing to take a chance and so on. But after they have this meeting, there's a moment where he basically just decides on a whim that he's going to go through with it, and he writes her like a sort of like a check as a deposit when he sees like she's living out of her car, and she has this happy moment looking at the check, and then she's like delighted that all this is happening. And honestly, I had kind of like a slight tinge of a problem at this moment, just because it all felt a little too easy. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing in the sense that obviously if it's building up to him betraying her or him tricking her in some way or whatever it may be, then this feeling that it's too easy would be justified. And it is too easy, it's too good to be true, because he maybe has an ulterior motive or something. But what stuck out to me is that it felt that way without kind of any real vibe or any real kind of style. It just kind of felt like a weird beat in the script where it was just getting to this point too quickly. I think something as simple as a really stylized piece of constant music, perhaps. When I think of a lot of stuff that tackles this kind of story, you tend to get a lot of synth music, or you'll get a lot of dreamlike music, or you'll get something that constantly gives you this idea of the character being in Wonderland, where the dream of Hollywood has not been crushed yet, or even something like Mulholland Drive. A lot of Mulholland Drive is about this young woman who comes to the city. She's going to be an actress, and she's got this optimism, and she's got all this thing. And I think maybe what's actually a little bit weird about the premise of this is that our main character of Lisa is not that upbeat. She's actually kind of a moody kind of character. I mean, not super moody, but like, she's not Naomi Watts in Mulholland Drive, which isn't actually, again, a bad thing on its own. If anything, there's this idea of she thinks she's not naive, but she's still very naive. Like, she thinks she knows what she's doing. She thinks she's got the attitude, but ultimately she's still young, she's still inexperienced, and still possibly is going to get taken advantage of or tricked or something. Yeah, that juxtaposition is cool. That's fine. That's totally fine. It just kind of felt like it was lacking like some kind of style. I felt like as they were having these conversations, it became a Netflix show. It became people in a room just talking, and it's one of those things where I imagine filming these scenes for actors is probably pretty satisfying, because they're basically just giving lots of material to work with, and they get to just sit down and act. But for the most part, it does tend to just kind of drone on a little bit. And I felt that maybe in like half a dozen scenes in particular in this episode, and it tended to be between Lisa and the producer, Burke. It tended to be between them because they have the scenes where they're talking about their past, or her past specifically, and talking about her mother who left her when she was young, or even at birth. He brings up random bits of trivia, like I mentioned before, and there's a lot of things that sort of go on and on. And I don't, I felt like a more distinct directorial style, possibly aided with music or something, just to give it a different kind of sense. And because there's these little moments where it kind of starts to come to life a little bit, but it felt like it felt too much like a TV show. I guess is what I'm saying. Like the sort of story this was telling, all I could think was this: if this was just a bit more of a movie, if it was a bit more stylized and had a bit more, just I don't know, character. I felt like it was lacking character, which I think is something I've had a problem with a bunch of Netflix things, especially Netflix movies, is that they set up the type of character that they want from their movie or show, but then once you actually start watching the thing, very quickly it feels like it kind of just drains away. It's one of the things that makes Stranger Things so good, is that Stranger Things upholds the vibe that it's going for the entire time. The way the story is written, the way the characters fit into the story, the type of characters and stereotypes and archetypes that they are, the way the story builds, it all feels very true to the theme of what Stranger Things is built in, kind of what it sells itself on, which is that pulpy mix of 80s pop culture and the style of a monster movie from that time. This kind of sets you up for a kind of a bunch of the different things that I've been mentioning, comparing it to a little bit of Neon Demon, a little bit of Mulholland Drive, a little bit of something else. And you've got all these things, and that's cool, but it kind of feels like it doesn't live up to actually really fulfilling that as it's playing out. And it's not so much that the plot of any of those things is going to mirror the plot of this, because it doesn't seem like it is. It feels like, especially by the time we get to the end of this episode, and we're getting into more the revenge side of things, it's going to be its own thing. It's going to do its own, and it is based on a book, I believe, so clearly it's got its own story to tell, and that's cool, that's fine. But I found myself missing something a bit more distinctly stylized as it was going on. It really felt like the one thing that was really missing. And I don't even want to say that it's just poorly paced, or it has that Netflix thing where it feels like they're just stretching out scenes a little bit too much. Because while I did feel that a little bit, I think it's less to do with stuff being stretched and scenes feeling like they're just being too long, and more to do with it needed to be more directed. It needed to have a bit more of a like I say, a character, a bit more of a presence from scene to scene. There's several scenes that just feel like such simple, normal TV scenes of back and forth talking with, little flourishes here or there, but not really enough to actually give you a feeling. It probably didn't help that one of the weirder elements that it introduces, which is kind of this mysterious character that I'll get into a little bit more in spoilers, that I thought everything with Hart fell a little bit flat, which is a little bit worrying for going forward as well, because it feels like she's going to be a very prominent character getting into the future episodes. So that's kind of a shame. It's frustrating. It's frustrating when you want to like something, but you just don't feel the quality of the actual filmmaking up to the standard of what you want from it, because you like what it's aiming for, but you just don't actually feel it in the finished product. That's kind of, and arguably, there's always an argument to say that what I think it's going for is not what it's going for, but if it's not going for what I feel like it's going for, then it's just failed in another way. it's failed by just not being that engaging on its own. Whereas I can kind of recognize exactly what it wants to feel like, and just feeling like I'm not quite getting it, unfortunately. Parts of this really felt like they should feel more like a fever dream, with perhaps less dialogue or something like that. But instead, there's a lot of sitting and there's a lot of talking, and it's not that engaging all the time. It really isn't, which is a shame. So I'll probably leave it there for spoiler free. The only one thing I'll add in spoiler free is that I do think the build to what she needs revenge for, or what she wants to get revenge for, it does have a nice kind of like climax, if you want. Is climax the right word? I don't know, but you know you feel like it's building where okay, you can kind of see how she's being screwed over here, but the moment where it kind of like it peaks, where it she feels at her lowest, that moment I think is actually quite well done and comes across very kind of hard hitting. So I'll give it that. That element is there. So I'll give it that. But so spoilers. I'll give you some spoilers then. Spoiler warning, I should say, for this. Well, I'm going to give you spoilers, but that's not the goal. The goal is to talk about what happens in it, to analyze it a bit more. The relationship with this producer is that your first thought is okay. He's contacted this young woman who's in her 20s, and he even says when he meets her that, oh, you're barely older than my son. And you're like, oh, what's this? Is this are we getting into some weird casting couch territory here? It kind of feels like it might be going that way. And what's funny is that he seems kind of, other than the fact that it felt too easy, he seems kind of genuine for long enough. And then he's trying to like work with her to help her sell herself to the studios, to other producers, that kind of thing. Like, you have to convince them that you're the right person to make this movie. So he's kind of trying to like guide her and give her advice on that. And he says, hey, this hotshot executive guy, he's going to be at this art thing, so let's go to that. We'll strike up casual conversation with them, and we'll get this movie made. And she gets dressed up. And if you've seen the trailer, you've seen the posters or some of the images from it, she tends to be in this like sort of shiny jacket that in those images. And that's where she's wearing that in the show. And they go to this thing, but then it gets kind of weird where he goes off and talks to the guy on his own, and she's not there, and she's rightfully skeptical. But the first weird thing is actually before they go in there, because the first time he does something that's a little bit, that's to say a little bit, the first time he overtly does something that is like, oh no, there's a red flag here now, is when she's sort of saying thank you for everything he's doing, and they're sitting in the car, he puts his hand on her thigh and says, oh, we make a good team. And it sits there for a long time until she eventually kind of like clears her throat and moves it. And it plays off kind of well enough. Like, maybe like he kind of just like accepts the message that he just got, because he kind of like says, okay, oh, I'm sorry, I thought, and he kind of moves on. But of course, him being a CD producer, you're kind of thinking, oh no, this could be the start of a bad sequence of events. And after the party, when he's taking her home or whatever, he randomly stops the car, and they have this awkward moment where he tries to kiss her. She pushes him off, doesn't want to get back in the car with him, so he just leaves her, and she walks home. Then finds out that her friend's friend, who's actually a young director as well, is now in talks to direct her movie. So she storms her way into producer's mansion, where she's been before for meetings, and even meets his son and wife for the first time. And we didn't even know he was married. I mean, we assumed he was married at some point because he had a son, but we didn't really know anything about his current status. She demands to know what this is about, and he kind of talks around it, but says, there was promises made, but then there's actual agreements, and you signed a contract. Do you realize what you signed? It makes it very clear that he does have the rights to make her movie now, and she can't really do anything about it. She's got a tear running down her cheek, and she's asking him to just say it, like, just admit it. Why are you punishing me? Admit it. She wants him to admit that he has made this swerve. He has completely changed his mind because she wouldn't have sex with him. And he never does. He never outright says that. He dances around it and, says, this is a learning moment. You'll have a long career now. You can't just go straight to the top, blah, blah, blah. And he chases after her when she's leaving and says, look, I can't let you leave in this upset. This is a learning moment, and one of the things you're going to have to learn to do is apologize. And she's like, you want me to apologize? And he's like, you stormed into my house unannounced and threatened me. When she refuses and says to him, you picked up my movie because you're a washed up hack. And it's referenced a few times throughout the episode that he's not had a hit in a few years. He's been on a bit of a bad streak. And when he hears this, he just snaps and he grabs her by the throat, pins her down against her car, and yells at her, swears at her, um, and shows his true colors. Right, the real him kind of comes like flying out. There's a good moment. Like I do think the direction's kind of dull for a lot of the episode. I do think there's a good moment here though, where when he leaves and goes back into his house, Lisa kind of just sort of stays on the hood of the car, just kind of like staring up at the trees and like being like just frozen in shock at the experience she just went through. And this is what I was saying earlier when I thought this the apex of like, okay, she needs to get revenge now, because you already felt it. When she's in the house talking to him and he's saying, hey, I can do what I want now, I've changed my mind, and you get the feeling that he has changed his mind because he made a move and she rejected him. You're already kind of okay, right, this is what the revenge is for, this makes sense. But this moment here where he grabs her by the neck, it really sort of like dials it up a notch, and it kind of feels like, okay, now I get, like, this has been completely taken from her. She's been belittled. She's been made to feel like shit, like she's nothing in this system, chewed up the way that Hollywood chews people up. And this is where she sort of goes to the address at the end of the episode. The mysterious woman with all the cats who was introduced earlier in the episode. She gave her an address at the gallery party, the art show, and she finds this place. The mysterious motorbike guy is here, and he takes off the helmet, and he's some old dude. Like, he's not even that. I mean, he's a bit creepy, but he's not like menacing in he's an axe murderer kind of way. And she goes through this weird garden where there's like naked people randomly in places, finds this woman who is a witch or whatever she may be, and says, I need revenge. The woman says, like, you need to make a down payment, like you have something inside. And I was like, oh, do you mean her soul? And then she makes Lisa cough up a kitten, like a newborn kitten. So all the cats that she had throughout the episode are actually coming from people. Very odd. Very, very odd. But says, he took my movie. I want my movie back, and I want his world to burn. And that's the end of the episode. And the woman says, yeah, we can do that. The story of this first episode is the very simple story of a young person comes to Hollywood, wants to have control over something in the movie making business, gets completely screwed over. Now, while it was probably naive of her to assume that she could retain that control and be the director of her own movie when she's never worked in Hollywood with anyone else, she doesn't have any contacts, she's never done all these things, maybe that's a lesson she was always going to have to learn. But you tie that in with the trickery of her being screwed out of her movie, and then you add on the sexual advances and that being a motive for him, and you really add up all these things where it turns it very insidious, and you're kind of like, okay, yeah, let's get revenge, right? We're on board. We're on board for her tearing this guy's life down. But damn, I wish there was just more of a mood and more of a style throughout more of the episode. Once she gets to the city, and we have scenes with the producer in the restaurant where they first meet, or in his mansion, or they're in the car. The only one that has maybe a little bit of style is when they're standing up on the hills looking out at the city, and it's just mainly just because of the visual of the city, right? It's this the glitz and glamour, and I appreciate that this conversation that takes place looking over, the city is. Which is, this very sparkly, dreamlike vista of an image. The conversation they have is about her motivations and why she wants to make movies and who her audience is, like what was her real goal. And she gets very emotional, and she gets talking about her mother and how her mother left, and how she hopes that if she makes a movie, like a real movie that's released in theaters and is out in the world, that her mother will somehow see it. And it not even necessarily that it'll reform a bond, but it would be a way to finally get like a communication to her. So they're up in the hills, they're looking out the city, beautiful vista, and she's literally talking about her dreams of making movies and why she wants to make movies. I do very much like the narrative irony of the fact that the next scene that takes place up in this same location, I mean, it may not be the exact same spot, but the same kind of visuals. Up in the hills, it's looking out of the city at night time, is when he tries to kiss her and then abandons her when she doesn't want to go with him. Like, her dream effectively is killed because she has this realization that he really wants to do this. That happens in the same spot that she opened up. And it felt like they were bonding a little bit, and it's almost like he was just kind of trying to dig for information or whatever it was. But her dream was laid bare in this location, and in that same beautiful vista is also where it was ruined. And this, it's kind of, again, it's almost like a simple metaphor for the, you dream of going to California to go to Hollywood, but then that place will also break you, and it will also crush your spirits. That's kind of what these two scenes up in the hills represented. It worked well enough. There's definitely some thought that's went into that. It wouldn't be surprising to me if that's just straight out of the book. Like, it's just, that was the themes and the subtext of what was going on and the writing, and that's cool. And that's what the main story of this is. The actual, like, supernatural, possible witch-like woman who can get revenge. And there's a small example, because she, at the party, she says to Lisa to think of, that guy you were with, the producer. Think of him now. Think you're inside his body, and she's like, inside his body. Yeah, like you're walking around inside his body, and imagining something. I can't remember what phrase she used, but something isn't working or something breaks. And you imagine it? And she's like, yeah, I'm imagining it. And then when he does reappear after having this secret conversation with the other guy, he's got a nosebleed. And Lisa looks kind of like, like unnerved. So presumably what she imagined breaking was his nose or something that would cause a nosebleed. So that it's like a little example. I have to admit, though, the mysterious cat lady who might be a witch is probably the least interesting thing about the episode. Yeah, I'm just kind of bummed out. I really like what it's going for. I kind of like the themes and the ideas, and there's a couple of neat touches in the storytelling in terms of how it thematically is there in the story. But I do think from a technical perspective, it's really lacking some style and some flair. I want to feel the dreamlike nature of the whole thing. Maybe this should have been a movie rather than a TV show, or maybe just a TV show with some more stylized direction. It is that side of it felt very lacking to me, and it's not something that's a deal breaker in a lot of different types of show. I don't come out here and critique a more stylized, visual spectacle in something that is more of a straight drama, or is something that's more of just a comedy or something like that. The reason why I'm specifically harping on it on this particular show and this particular concept is because it does enough to make you think that it wants to feel like that, and then you tie in the other things, the other works, the other movies and stuff that feel like it's kind of a cousin to in terms of what it's going for. It does feel like it's missing something. It feels like it's missing some heart in that way. So I think that's kind of a shame. And we do briefly get to meet Jeff Ward's character, Deke from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. He's like an actor in this world, but he only has a couple of quick scenes. There's not a whole lot to say about him in this first episode. I believe one of the actors from Travelers, which I liked a lot, is in this. Yes, she is. Kat from Travelers is in this. Apparently she was the wife of the producer. You only get one quick glimpse at her in the episode, so I didn't recognize her in the episode, but apparently that was her. So that's fair. So needless to say, I probably won't be checking out episode 2. I don't feel particularly compelled to. So, but there you go. As far as covering new pilots and new shows and seeing if I like them, I know Heels is starting. I think that premieres on Sunday, so it'll likely be Monday or so when I've got a review out for that, maybe Tuesday. So look out for that. That's the new show with Stephen Amell. It's about wrestlers, but it's a drama. This is from Stars, if I remember correctly. So look forward to me checking out that, I guess. But yeah, so that's a brand new cherry flavor, and it's not bad. It's just okay, but it didn't quite have the spark that I was hoping for, unfortunately. So there you go. Let me know what you thought of the first episode, and indeed, if you do watch the whole show, all 8 episodes, feel free to give some spoiler-free thoughts. And the reason why spoiler-free is because other people who, are going to watch the show might check out my review of the first one and look at the comments and discuss it before they move on to the rest. So make sure you don't put spoilers in the comments without warning. Obviously, you can, if you heavily warn it, by all means. But so yeah, let me know what you think of the episode in the comments. Like and subscribe, all that stuff. Get me on the Twitters at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. Check out Mail Fuzz Movies for the movie review podcasts that are over there. Both horror, sci-fi, and occasionally some other stuff too. Otherwise, like, subscribe, and ding the bell for notifications. All of that does help out YouTube channels a lot, so please do hit the buttons. And of course, patreon.com/mailfuzztv is where you can support us for as little as $1 per month and get some bonuses for your trouble. So go and have a look and see if you're interested. But otherwise, that is me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?